Okay, so it's 1:03 Eastern Time. So I think we can probably get started. So I want to welcome everyone to a very special hour during a very special week of remembrance to honor those who gave their lives to serve this country and to learn from members of our military, survivors of too many conflicts still unfolding today. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm Lisa LaFlamme. It is truly an honor to be part of the Historica Canada Memory Project. So we've devoted an hour to this conversation. If we want to bring up our very special guests, a distinguished panel, I'll just wait for that to open up, which I don't see it.
Sorry, what are you looking for, Lisa?
Are you going to get rid of the?
Yes, I turned off the share screen. Sorry, the banner is gone. Everyone should be able to see our lovely panelists and Lisa.
Yes. All right, I don't see. I only see the big banner.
Oh, well, I have removed the sharing, so.
Okay.
Apologies.
All right, sorry, folks at home. I'm the one here with the technical issues, but if you can see our guests, then that is the most important thing. I'm not sure why I can't, but that's all right. Here we go. Anyway, like I say, we've devoted an hour for this conversation, and I'm certain that given our distinguished panel today and the insightful questions that have come in, we could really talk forever. So let me introduce our special guests. Sergeant Shirley Jew, who has served in both regular and reserve forces domestically and around the world, including Afghanistan, is now a master dog trainer under MSAR service dogs. Retired Major Bob Crane, who was, while serving, the most senior Indigenous serving member, a veteran of the Gulf War, UN peacekeeping missions, Israel, Syria, Iran, Iraq, also served as a civilian in Afghanistan. Retired Major General Hal Skaarup, an Army intelligence officer for most of his 40 years in the Canadian Forces and part of the Canadian Forces parachute team. He served in Cyprus, Bosnia, NORAD in Colorado on the actual day, 9/11. So we're definitely going to talk about that, and ISAF in Kabul. I want to start, though, with the reason that we are all here today. Remembrance Day. And Shirley, I want to begin with you, not just because you have 10 centimeters of snow on the ground where you are in Stony Plain and we feel your pain, but you started as a cadet at 13 years old. So what, if you can tell us, that first Remembrance Day you can recall, and why did it stay with you?
Wow, my first Remembrance Day as an Army cadet, it was in Toronto, Nova Scotia. And I was so proud because my parents raised us to know how fortunate we were to become Canadians, to have freedom. And they instilled it in us. The most honorable way you could serve was to give back to this country that gave my family freedom. And now the second and the third generation are here and they're free.
They're free, and freedom is just such a charged word these days, and an important word, and we're going to explore more of that. And Bob, I want to bring you in, Major Bob Crane, proud member of Black Cree First Nation. You also were a young joiner right out of high school. And it's important, I think, right now we say November 11th is Remembrance Day, but November 8th marks National Indigenous Veterans Day. So can you take an opportunity now to help everyone better understand the enormous contribution of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit to Canadian military service?
Oh, where to start? There's all kinds of history available on the web with regards to contributions by Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. It's difficult to understand where to start, but I mean, you can go all the way back to World War I, World War II, Korea, and since the conflict since, and know that there's been a tremendous amount of participation, contributions by Indigenous warriors. I'll call them warriors. And it's my honor to assume the legacy of those warriors, because they not only fought overseas as part of the Canadian contingents, but when they came back to Canada, they fought on our behalf. And a lot of the rights and privileges that we enjoy today, you can trace back to the organizations that were formed back then and how they fought for our rights. So it's tremendous, and I encourage people to read about it when they can on the web.
And I want to weave that through this hour so that we never forget the contributions. And Hal, I want to bring you in, retired Major Hal Skaarup. You've devoted so much of your post-military life. I guess you're never really post-military though, are you? Once a military, always a military. But as an author and historian, to educate young people. And I wonder, in your opinion, what needs to happen to make sure, as veterans age, that Remembrance Day doesn't get sort of crowded out of the calendar by a generation that is further removed, if you will?
I would say that it has more to do with our New Brunswick culture when I answer this question. We need to talk to people, and people need to talk to us. Start with the teachers. In my great good fortune, I've been a volunteer tour guide taking high school students, actually all grades and seniors, on tours of two different museums, our Fredericton Region Museum and the Military Museum at Base Gagetown. What it is we need more teachers to recognize that if you don't bring the people in who did the job or are doing the job or are going to do the job, they're not going to hear the oral tradition, the stories of why we serve, of how Canada has come to be engaged in things that are going on in the world. So to me, we've got to get into the schools. We've got to encourage the schools to encourage them to invite us to come and speak to them. And not just veterans, young people in their 20s and 30s who are fairly new and haven't got a lot of experience, but they're going through the life experience of being in the military now. They see all around them, from their experiences, from their training, from their courses, what a difference it makes to be part of our Canadian forces, and has always been that way. My interest began with my grandfather. Both my grandfathers fought in the First World War on opposite sides. Things change. I'm named after an uncle who was killed during the war in Italy, 1944. School kids, unbeknownst to me at the time, wrote up his story and then shared it with me. We need to continue to encourage schools in particular to encourage their students to talk to us, invite us, bring people like us in to share the stories and to tell our history. It will die otherwise.
It's so much of whether you're a serving member or just a human being on this earth, this all is a family backstory. Every single family has one. And Shirley, I want to ask you if you can give us some perspective on your earliest memories. I mean, Hal's just outlined how it has fit into his family tree, but for you and your parents coming to this country, which may have instilled in you that desire to serve.
I'm a first generation Canadian, proudly so. Both my parents survived the war. The only thing they basically talked about was hiding in the rice fields. They raised us under two cultures, the Chinese culture and the Canadian culture, and they embraced everything Canadian. And they raised us knowing how fortunate we were to be born in this country. They had a choice of where they wanted to live, and Canada was their choice because it was not a melting pot. I proudly and have proudly worn this uniform for 38 years. I continue to wear the uniform because I will never dishonor it.
That history is so powerful to hear about the importance of culture. And Bob, I find it fascinating that it was actually while you were in the Gulf War that triggered your own determination to know more about your Indigenous culture? First of all, set the scene for us. Where were you? Why? What happened that made you realize you want to know more about your own story?
When you're in the military, you spend all your time training. You're going on courses. You're learning how to take on new skills. You're not really worried about or thinking about your culture. Everybody is pretty well the same way. We just want to be the best soldier that we can be. But when I got back from, it was the Gulf War, I think because I was getting older in age, I started realizing about my own mortality. Now, my mother never hid the fact that we were Blackfoot. That's my tribe, is Blackfoot from Alberta. And she always regaled me of stories about our family's involvement in past conflicts. My great-great-grandfather actually fought the Crees in the last Cree-Blackfoot War. My great-grandfather was also a warrior, a Blackfoot warrior, the last of them. And my dad, and he actually adopted me. He was a Newfoundlander, and I was adopted by him. And he was a Korean veteran, and I idolized this man, and he taught me everything I would need to know. How to survive, like hunt and fish, and how to survive in the woods. And he was my inspiration for joining. When I was in the Gulf, I realized that okay, now you've pretty well had your baptism of fire, shall we say, and there's got to be more to life. And when I came back, the city of Calgary had a powwow in my honor. And there were World War I veterans there, there were World War II veterans there, and they honored me. And it was then I started thinking, next to nothing about your culture, learn. And that's where I started. It was because of my experience in the Gulf that I realized that now is the time I have to learn.
And let me stick with you for 1 second, Bob. Can you give us your most memorable experience? Maybe not the Gulf, but in general. And I should tell everybody who's joining in that while we were waiting for this to begin, I had this amazing, rare pleasure of hearing these three incredible people reminiscing about their experiences in various countries. And I want to try to bring, we've now put a few more chairs around this kitchen table for this conversation. So Bob, maybe you can share with us what was your most memorable military experience?
Well, I'm pretty sure my two colleagues would agree with me. You amass many stories, some good, some not so good. But I do remember in the Gulf War, I think this really was amazing because at the time, Saddam was retreating from the coalition forces back into Iraq, and he lit fire to the oil wells in Kuwait. And it actually, the oil smoke and the soot, it turned the day into night. It's absolutely incredible. And I remember that Canada had issued Tilly hats to the soldiers that went over to the Gulf. And I still have mine, and it is pretty well black from the soot and the smoke. And I keep that as a memento of my time there. And then, when I came back to Canada and I went to give blood, and they said, well, perhaps not right now. And I used to be a regular contributor, and they said, not right now. And little wonder why, because we were walking chemical bombs, like walking pharmacies. We took pyridostigmine bromide. We took mefloquine for malaria. We wore DDT on our ankles to keep the desert fleas from biting. And we also had all the normal shots that you would get if you're traveling overseas, that the military was always fond of giving you. So there was no doubt in my mind. I understood why, because my blood was pretty well contaminated. And that's the story I like to tell everybody, because that pyridostigmine bromide, which was an anti-nerve agent, was never approved for use, but it was approved for use on the soldiers. We were forced to take it. So that's another story I like to tell. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues because I know they have other stories.
The disturbing point, and I can say, even as a journalist covering, Iraq in 2003 and Afghanistan, we used to travel with chem suits. I mean, the world and the war has changed so much, and how I want to bring you in here because of that reference Bob's making. Years later, it was actually 9/11 that seemed to really change the war and the world, and you were in a very interesting place on that very day. And I want you to give us, first of all, what was it like? What did it feel like at that moment, and what it triggered really here 21 years later?
On 9/11, I was with NORAD inside Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. It's the headquarters of NORAD. NORAD is commanded by an American in the US, with his deputy being a Canadian, and is commanded by a Canadian in Canada, and his deputy is American. On 9/11, the American was away, and it was a Canadian making the decisions. Two, because it was the largest exercise we're on annually, everybody who was in any position of authority or power or command decision-making was sitting in his chair. I was preparing to brief them, and behind me were two gigantic CNN screens with CNN on. And the first shot was, of course, the first tower on fire after the plane had hit it. And all of us watched the second aircraft fly into the tower, live video, whatever it is, and smash it open. We were physically talking to the people in the Pentagon and asking them, have you got a situation in your case? And they're saying the alarms are going off. A plane has just hit the building they're in. While we were having the conversation with him. Every single person there was in absolutely no doubt, this is going to hit and affect all of us. Now, the peculiar thing is, there are around 150 Canadians down there, mostly Air Force, a handful of Navy, and 6 of us in the Army. And we were all looking at each other saying, guess where we're going? Now, we all came back about 2003, and in 2004, I wound up being with 5th Brigade in Kabul. And when I looked around, realized 5 of the 6 Army guys who had been with us that day were in Afghanistan. Direct cause and effect. It was just, again, there's also this Canadian thing of, you were in America, you've had your jammy go, now it's time to get back to work. But the other thing that struck me was how it brought people together. This business of there are communications that are shared only by certain people. And the communications and the letters and the traffic will say, Canadian eyes only, no foreign, American eyes only, in effect. All of a sudden that stopped. We weren't Americans, we weren't Canadians. We were North Americans in a fight for our lives, as far as we knew. I do know that I would not have advised anybody to have gone for a flight anywhere in the very near future after that. But interestingly to me, it was a Canadian who ordered all the aircraft down. We have an effect. We work with our partners. And as I've explained to people, we did not see it as a world war coming. We saw it as a war that had to be put a stop to. And that's why I do not believe we will have a 3rd world war, because we stand ready to do exactly that. And as I say, them to the south and us to the north, it wasn't like that on 9/11. It was us, and we will stop this.
Well, we are clearly in a struggle right now in the world between democracy and autocracy. The war in Ukraine obviously is evidence that world powers are still prepared for a ground war. So we will talk a little bit about that later on, but I want to stick with what happened at that moment, because I think the world, certainly Canada did, saw a recruitment drive. So many young people saw what happened on 9/11. These are people we know, my generation and younger. It brought Remembrance Day, if you will, back, what happened in that Canada's longest war. And Shirley, you were there in Kandahar. Give us your most searing memories of that experience. And and how it changed everything for you personally.
I was part of the closeout mission with the Huron UAVs. Most amazing work I've ever done was working with that. Basically, you're judge, jury, and executioner, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. A lot of people thought that in intelligence, all we did was sit around, watch some videos, eat some popcorn, and write a report. My hardest was the first kill. Your hardest is realizing when you get home that your decisions led to people dying, and at the end of the day, they are people. That's the moral injury of what you do when you're in uniform. Sometimes, the proudest job I've ever done, though. We worked with our allies, and we counted on each other. There was no this country, that country. It was us as a whole force together. And I'm so proud to have been part of that. I'm so proud to have been given the honor of such a responsibility. And I think that's the one thing in uniform that makes everyone's careers very different, is that part. Is that when you wear the uniform and you represent this country, the responsibilities you have, everything you do is a reflection of the country. And I think that's been the most humbling experience in my life, is realizing that this country that gave my family freedom, they trusted me enough to make those decisions, those tough decisions. And in the intelligence world, to be trusted with that kind of responsibility and the information we're given, it's very humbling.
But you just said so many such powerful things, but decisions you made had to lead to people dying. And Bob, do you think young people have an appropriate understanding of the risks and the commitment involved in joining the military and the potential for losing your life for your country?
No, I don't think they fully understand that, but then neither did I when I joined. I mean, I'm like the majority of people who joined the military. We did it for adventure, did it for a job, did it to to get away from home. In my case, I was the oldest of 11, so growing up in Newfoundland, and I needed to establish myself. And the military was the place to do it. Worrying about calling up courage was the farthest thing from my mind at that time. I was more concerned with surviving, making a career in the military. It wasn't until many years later that I had to call up on that courage. And every person has to face that. It's a bit of a lonely time, and you'll know when your time comes that you're going to have some serious conversations with yourself. In fact, I had the opportunity to call my dad, and I said I was worried about my experience that I was about to go through. And my dad, knowing that I've already been in the military for some time, he said, "Well, son, are you confident in your training?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, when you get scared, you concentrate on doing what you were trained to do, and that'll get you through." I think everybody has to face that time sooner or later when they join the military, because ultimately what could happen is that something is going to be sacrificed somewhere.
Wow. It's training. Hal, you say that all the time. It's the training that you, the men and women of our military have, that makes all the difference in life and death. But is there something you wish you'd have known before you first deployed?
Oh, big one is I wish I listened more than I talked, and I wish that I assessed more than I acted. But I would rather tell you a bit of a story about what kicks in maybe in spite of the training or because of the training, but I think more because of who we are and our culture. And Major Diddich is coming down the hill and just north of Kabul. And there were a couple of villages there that we went to with our labs that they weren't friendly. But there was a flash flood, a heavy rain up in the mountains. And as Diddich and his crew were coming in with their convoy of 2 labs and their bandus, all of a sudden these people come out waving, like this, waving and stopping like that. And the guys are going, guns up, what's going on? Pay attention, everybody alert. But the crowd pointed at a couple of children that were nearby and then pointed to the water. And he realized that a child had gone into the water as the flash flood hits. Diddich jumped off his lab, he threw his helmet down and he dove into the water. He still got his flak jacket on and stuff, and got down into this cistern. And he got hold of this tiny little hand and he grabs onto it. He's got kids of his own, both same age, and he pulls out this little girl. Now, what he doesn't know is this happened 5 or 10 minutes ago. And he's there standing in the water up to his chest, trying to give her mouth to mouth, and there's no chance. He looks up at the crowd, and the people reach out to touch him, take him by the shoulder, pull him out. And he burst into tears. He said, I couldn't help myself because I debriefed the patrols and they came back. But I can tell you this, that will affect him for the rest of his life. But every time a Canadian vehicle came through there after that, they waved and there was clear friendliness. They understood, you're not so different from us. Is that your training or is that our culture? I don't know. But I do know that that kind of thing makes a huge difference, because word goes out when you've done wrong. It also goes out when people are just like you and do the right thing the best they can. Wow, it affects me even now when I think about it.
Yeah,
Lisa, could I share something from the Gulf War, and it supports what Hal is saying. At the end of the war, they brought in a casualty. It was an Iraqi soldier. He had been discovered upside down in a buried trench, and he was suffering from phosphorus burns. And phosphorus burns need oxygen to stay alive. So other countries that were there, the Americans and the Brits, they said, no, there's nothing we can do. This man is going to die. And it was the Canadian doctors, as part of the field hospital, that took that soldier in and they immersed him in water, and then they started operating to take the phosphorus out of his body.
Has to be cut off.
And at the time, the commanding officer said the soldiers need to see to what degree Canadian doctors will go to save somebody. And that's something I won't forget. It supports what you're saying, Hal.
Yep.
I need to bring a story in here too at this moment. I'm going to get all emotional, but Camp Nathan Smith, which was the smaller base in Kandahar, you know, I'll never forget the day an old grandfather walked up the lane to the security gates with a little boy, and the little boy had a cloth wrapped around his face. Now this was a medic. There was a hospital in there. And that little boy had a cancerous tumor on his face. And these Canadian soldiers, who, if anyone's been to Camp Nathan Smith, you know it's right in the middle of the most dangerous part of Kandahar. So there's, you know, RPGs flying everywhere, and they didn't care. They just moved in. The medical staff took this little boy, did what they could, realized this was too big a job for the facilities. It was a cancerous tumor. And these soldiers, it was the most emotional and amazing thing. Namatola was that little boy's name. And he ended up being airlifted to Pakistan, to a children's cancer hospital. But I'll never forget what the Canadian soldiers and the medics and the men and the women did to just try to give this little boy, I don't know, some peace, some quiet, some joy, even as simple as throwing a ball around. And it's exactly what you're talking about. These things, though, do not leave us. They don't leave soldiers. They don't leave journalists either. And Shirley, I want, if you're comfortable, to tell us how the military, those experiences affected you personally and the struggles you faced when you returned home and when you kind of realized that you needed help mentally to process what you'd seen and been part of.
Well, when I returned in 2011, I did my 4 months, and our tour was cut short because it was the end of the combat mission. And I remember I was told to take 2 months off because I never had any leave during that time. And I spent 3 days at my best friend's place because I needed a little bit of peace. And then I started driving across the Interstate 2. And I went by a small airfield, and they were clearing birds. And the way they clear birds is shotguns and rounds. Mm-hmm. And when I heard the rounds, I literally ducked and looked for a bunker on the interstate. And it's down to 80 kilometers an hour. And I was like, and then I realized I'm home, I'm safe. And I slowly inched my way back up in my car thinking, I hope nobody noticed that. And from there, that was my first red flag that I ignored. And then sleeping an hour and a half a night for pretty much 2 years. Because if it's dark and quiet, that's when the attacks come. And I checked my house like 30 seconds. Because I think we were going to get attacked. And in 2013, after I rescued that little dog, the reason I put her aside is because she knows I'm really activated. She keeps trying to calm me down. I rescued this little dog. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have been alive that week.
Wow.
You're not alone, Shirley. You are not alone.
No, I wish I was there to give you a hug right now. Honestly, Snoopy saved your life, and then you've gone on to help. And I think this is a good time for you to tell us about the work you do with service dogs. I saw them in action in Iraq and Afghanistan and other countries, but the bond is extraordinary. And Shirley, help us better understand just what that is that gives us strength from our four-legged friends and the training that goes into this.
The strange part is the day I snapped, it was the 8th of May, 2013, and my captain, Sean Dion, he was air crew. He was the captain at our RTF. He cracked a joke and I snapped, and I almost killed him. And I couldn't calm down. And my social worker, Captain Woodhouse Gordon, I reached out to her, and it took her 2 hours to calm me down. Well, that night I just happened to be going to pick up a rescue dog, and her name was Tika Teka. I didn't know whatever to call her. And I drove to Lloydminster from Cold Lake, and I picked up this little dog. And I didn't know anything about service dogs, but it was my captain who said the next day, when he saw the change that she did for me, he told me I needed to bring her to work, turn her into a service dog, and he'd worry about the paperwork. So I reached out across Canada, and MSAR Courageous Companions were the first ones to actually tell me I didn't have to get rid of my dog, and they wouldn't take my money. So after I got Snoopy certified, I started an apprenticeship with them. And after 3 years of apprenticeship, I started the Certified Master Dog Trainer program. It took 3 years to complete with a little glitch in between because my mom passed away, so that they actually didn't know if I was going to come back. That pretty devastated me, my mom passing. So my way of giving back to the organization, the people who saved me, is to volunteer my services. So now I'm now the head tester for not only MSAR, but Courageous Companions and the Canadian Association of Service Dog Trainers. And this is my way to give back to the people who saved my life.
Giving back, you are paying it forward, my friend. That is a beautiful thing. And so many have benefited from the hard work you've done, you've faced internally, and now helping others. And I really feel that as we reflect on Remembrance Day, it has to include, while we're talking about mental health, you know, the tragic loss of soldiers who die by suicide when they return. And Hal, I'm going to ask you to comment on, is the help offered enough to our service members?
You get into statistics and facts, and then you get into what it really affects people. Let me put it this way. As far as I know, for roughly the last 30 years, we average about 14 suicides a year in the Canadian Forces. Sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower, but it generally does not change. And statistically, it's actually a little lower than it is for the rest of the Canadian population, but we are still part of the Canadian population. It is not something that is ever going to go away. I remember my grandfather talking about soldiers having shell shock. I've spoken to a lot of veterans, many of them now gone, who talked about their experiences with it. I've talked to people that I've served with and are now retired. We're still experiencing some of it. And as they say, like Major Didis did experience, it doesn't go away. But no young psychologist, psychiatrist, doctor, nurse, health practitioner, whatever it is going to solve that problem for any one individual. The Canadian Forces, from what I can see, is doing the best it can to help. But I will tell you this, the one thing that we as former soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women know is the one good thing that you can do for somebody who has had PTSD or is going through it is to put them with people who have had similar experiences. I mean, you might have been in Kandahar, I was in Kabul, somebody else was in Sarajevo. If you've been in a difficult situation, you understand what people go through when they have these traumatic experiences. You can talk to those people without being embarrassed or uncomfortable or feeling like nobody understands. Those are the people that are going to save your sanity, save your humanity, whatever, as in they will understand and they will listen and they will take the time to listen, and that works. And the military tries very hard to put people together with people like that who shared it. What does not work is taking somebody who's got 20, 30 years of service, he's been over there, he's seen enough dead, burnt bodies to know when it's good or when it's bad, but he's just experienced the loss of one of his own children and having a tough time coping. And again, soldiers, sailors, airmen, you name it, we do what we need to do if it's necessary to do. And so when it comes to making the decision to kill themselves, they go ahead and do it. It's not like it's maybe I will, maybe I won't. So the single best thing is putting those who are having the problem with others who are at least of kindred spirit. You're a veteran, I'm a veteran. My grandfather could talk to people. He was a First World War veteran, talking to people from the Second World War because they understood how hard it can be up there. The rest of us do not. I imagine, Bob and Shirley, you've talked to people that you've served with. And the most pressure lifting thing is talking to people who understand what it is you've gone through, and they throw no stones. Now, I have a couple of individuals that call me and they're whining. There's not a nice way to put it. And I'm going, for F's sakes, get your shit together and stop being a shit magnet for trouble. You know better. You can do better. Do it. Sort yourself out. I would not say that to you, Shirley, because that probably wouldn't go over very well. But the individual I'm talking to needs to hear it that way because it's real. I'm not treating him, oh, you poor little thing, you, that's too bad, so sad. No, you're a human being like I am. Take responsibility of yourself and get on with it. We can talk like that to people, and that will work. When if you said it, it would not, and it would offend them greatly. As I say, the one thing that the Canadian Forces does do is it brings a community together. Neither Bob nor Shirley nor myself nor you, Lisa, have crossed paths directly, and yet here we are having a conversation that we both relate to and understand because it has been our life experience. It is why we can have this experience. And that is because we served with and have been around the military and understand that it works. So yes, to answer the question long form, I think the Canadian Force is doing what it can.
Well, I have to say for myself, I just used to hide behind the biggest soldier, you know, because I never wanted to be a liability. But Bob,
You weren't a shit magnet, were you, Lisa? Did you draw fire? Shame on you. Holy smokes.
I have to say, you know, my thanks to the incredible Company CH. I had several pretty dicey experiences and have so many people to thank, and always want to remember on Remembrance Day, and actually all the time, the 158 Canadians who did lose their lives on Afghan soil. And but before we move on to that, because you make such a good point, Hal and Bob, I want to bring you in. It's one thing for the military to know how to speak to each other, although I could suggest that not everyone, Hal, would interpret that sort of tough love the same way, because you don't know how everybody's personal experience triggers them, but the public doesn't know. So Bob, how do you think the general public should best relate, or what can we do to talk to troops, to soldiers who fought, who are back, who are, you know, right now on the environs of the war in Ukraine, when they return from service? What can the general public do to better relate or show respect to our troops?
Awesome question, Lisa. By the way, Shirley, thanks for sharing with us your experiences, and I agree with you, Hal, on your point of view about PTSD. The general public doesn't really understand the experiences of veterans, and I find that's not a very good thing at all. I mean, in my own case, I joined the music club, and it was the members were all military, and it was a place where we could share along the same lines as Hal was talking about. Indigenous, we have our own communities, we have our own elders that we can turn to for advice, and that helps. When I came back from the Gulf War, my dear friend who we had served together in Iraq, his father was a veteran of the Second World War, and they took me to his farm, his ranch, and I was able to stay there for at least a month, and that significantly helped me, because they knew what veterans face when they come home. Everything is totally different. The way they were is not the way they are now. But the general public, unless they speak to a veteran, unless they listen to veterans, unless they understand or try to understand, even saying thank you to a veteran is enough to make that veteran feel better. Because
absolutely,
you know, it's tremendous when you're, for instance, in 11 November parade, or you go to a function where there are non-military members present, and they thank you for your service, and they say, you know, thank you, and that means so much to a veteran. Being thanked, having respect paid. I mean, you know, you can imagine the experiences you read about Vietnam veterans coming home and they were spat on by their own people. Well, you just need to go 180 away from that and find out what you need to do. But it's talking, it's understanding.
You know, some of my soldier friends are experiencing this right now. You know, if we reflect on Afghanistan, again, our longest war, now the Taliban has regained control, and a lot of people in the general public look at those 20 years, especially what's happened to women and girls in Afghanistan. No school, the impact on civilians. I get that part as a civilian. What about on the military, Shirley? The fact that the Taliban is back in charge.
The difference is we introduced a world that a lot of the younger generation never experienced before, which was a touch of freedom. And once that little seed is planted, you can't stop it.
Yes.
No matter what you do, you cannot stop it. You see it in China, where the generations that were forced to be quiet are slowly getting older. They've kept quiet and they've kept it hidden underground, and they're making the moves and they're doing the changes and they're viewing the world differently. You cannot stop the way time changes the world. Nothing stands still, no matter how much the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, or any other ISIS group may think they're totally in control. That's where they're the bigger fool. If you think that you can hold back the tide of humanity, you can't. You can't.
We're seeing it in Iran right now. We're seeing the bravest women in the world there, and in Kabul in Afghanistan. I know you and I have talked a little bit about this as well. So if you can share your perspective on that notion that there is a level of futility to Canada's work in Afghanistan under the prism of what happened a year ago, August 15th.
Back after 9/11, you have to picture what caused that in the first place, that led us to where the world is basically now. We stood up and said, okay, enough of that. Let's put a stop to it. We got over there, and we did. Now, again, in my limited experience, there were 11 warlords around Kabul. We disarmed all of them, whether they wanted to be or not. Too bad, so sad. We took the stuff away. And then suddenly there was, I would say suddenly, but there was a change. And the first change I noticed, I used to count the number of women who were wearing a burqa between the drive from Camp Julian to the headquarters and on the other side. A few hundred by day, and then it started to gradually reduce. And then the women started not wearing the burqa. They started going back to the browns and the hijabs and that, but going to makeup and looking regular. People started repairing their homes. Refugees started bringing their families back from Pakistan and other places. People began to rebuild. Now, the awkward thing was when we went after some of the criminals, quite often all we found was a vehicle that is shot full of so many holes you could see through it from any angle you looked at it, because all those scores, when they were ruling like the Taliban, were being settled. We were never going to stop that kind of tribal interference with each other. But from a few thousand children going to school when we first got there, to 750,000 and more kids, and almost half of them girls, going to school for the next half dozen or so years, that by itself, women getting educated and standing up for themselves. And boy, I met some pretty solid ones. Believe it or not, the commander of the Afghan Airborne Forces when I was there was General Katal, a woman. The leader of the hospital that had been forced out, and they eventually had to bring her back because she's a great surgeon, was turned into a lieutenant general by the name under Afghan's president. In any event, for a few years, educated people of all ages and all levels saw the difference. It's exactly what Shirley's saying. They had the experience. They're not going to go back. They may suffer under it for a little while, but exactly as she gave as an example, look at Iran. We're mad as hell and we're not going to take this anymore. The seed was planted. And how did that happen? We were there. And we were not the only seed. We worked with, as I say, in Afghanistan, 40 other countries, but we helped plant those seeds. Now, we cannot change their culture and their tribal animosities and affiliations and so on. That's their culture to sort out. But now they've got a whole bunch of people who've got this idea in their mind that maybe I can be more than I am. Maybe I can do more than I was told I have to do. And maybe I will make something happen to ensure that I can and will in the future. And those old dogs, they've been getting away with putting me in my place. We ain't taking that no more, babe. As in, no, it's not done. Yes, we made a difference. No, we don't want to go back to Afghanistan and start trying to kill people and get killed ourselves to bring a stop to it. It's up to them to sort it out. But we, as Shirley said, have planted the seed. Bob saw it as well as I did. You get that idea in the mind that you can be more than you are, that you can live a better life, you will do something about it.
Sadly, there has been and will be a lot of bloodshed in this
Yes.
time. I do want to, at this moment, and as we commemorate Remembrance Day and Remembrance Week, a major shout out to the Veterans Transition Network, who, you know, these incredible soldiers, and I want to mention General Denny Thompson and David Fraser and Paul Carroll and all of the troops that did so much, who fought in Afghanistan and now for the last year have helped do what they can to try to get women and girls, translators who worked with the Canadian military, out of that country, because of course that made them a collaborator, that
Yes.
put a Taliban target on their back. And it's been extraordinary behind the scenes work, if you will, on trying to save as many people as possible, all the while knowing, as you say, and you all say so truthfully, you can't erase those 20 years. Women who grew up, who are 25 today, they know what it was like to go to school and have the right, and they're going to keep wanting it and fighting for it. It's just a tragedy that, as I say, there's going to be a lot of you know, blood loss between now and whatever the future is going to look like. I don't know. I like to say democracy, but it sure doesn't look like that right now. I want to just bring it back, if I can. You know, we're going to look at some final thoughts now on this significant day, this significant week, and what you want. And I'll start with you, Bob. What you want, what you're going to remember on Remembrance Day, and what you want young people to take with them, so that Remembrance Day 20 years from now, we're still not just at the National War Memorial in Ottawa, which is very powerful, but in towns and villages across this country, there are cenotaphs that if no one's standing in front of them on Friday morning, I think you probably all share that's a fail. So how do we make that not happen?
I look at Remembrance from perhaps two different perspectives. One is the Indigenous contribution, and of course we have, like you said, Lisa, our own day on November the 8th. And then on November the 11th, it's for all of Canada's soldiers, Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. So, you know, I go downtown to the main ceremony at the National Cenotaph, or I'll attend the one here in Orleans. And I just want people to come out and acknowledge and talk to a veteran and thank a veteran. But I also want Canadians to understand the contributions of Indigenous veterans, and that's a legacy, as I mentioned earlier, that I've gladly assumed. And I lecture at schools. I do presentations this week, for instance, on Indigenous veterans in Canada's wars. And I just want Canadians to appreciate that, to understand that. But on 11th of November, it's all hands to the pump to remember the sacrifices of all of Canada's veterans.
Shirley, I'll put the same question to you. I want to hear everybody's thoughts on how we ensure this remains one of the most significant days on the calendar.
I think we have to be able to talk to the people at their level. So when I talk to schools, I talk to whether elementary students or high school students, I talk to them as a person. I talk to them at their level. And I think that's an important part of what the Memory Project does. And it's a huge, huge part, because like this week, I'll be talking to a high school, and it's being able to talk to them that they can understand you. Don't speak above them. I think as long as we have to bring across is honoring those who came before us, those who have paid the ultimate sacrifice, but also letting the young people know that, yeah, you know what? I'm still here and I paid the price mentally in so many ways and physically and all invisible injuries. However, given the same chance, I did all the same. Because why? I proudly served my country, and we're here to ensure that they don't experience some of the horrors we've seen. I think one of the things that impacted the youth that I speak to is I said to them, I said the difference between a military first responder versus a non is this: when the crap hits the fan, we're the one who's running in. They're the ones who are running out. And I said I would, even to this day, I would lay down my life to protect any of these people that I don't even know. And that's what service is about, is it's that courage to say, hey, coop's going downhill, man. Let's get into her, get her done.
And that's happening right now, as I say, in Ukraine, and we see Canadian forces. And Hal, I want to bring you in. They're not in Ukraine. Should they be? And certainly we keep them in our thoughts, and the people of Ukraine and Russia. I mean, this is a shocking thing we're living right now, and we can't look away from what's happening. It matters to all of us.
You have to be very careful about taking sides. We can't start fighting other people's wars for them. The reasons and causes behind it quite often can be beyond us. We had more than 150 Canadians in the Ukraine from 2014 up until February this year, training and helping aid the Ukrainian forces. We sent them 6 of our best artillery pieces and a whole whack of other kit, along with Denmark, England, Sweden, United States, Germany. There's a whole whack of countries supporting the Ukraine. But it is their fight to resolve. We can give them all the support possible, but if we want to get into it, okay, then it gets into a wider issue. You have to try and explain, how would we justify getting Canadians killed fighting a war in Ukraine where the Russians invaded? You really cannot. But can we look away? No. Are we still assisting with the training? Yes, we are. Are we giving them weapons and equipment? Yes, we are. Why? Because it's important that countries like Ukraine not be overrun by Russia. I mean, if Russia gets Ukraine, they aren't going to stop. Putin's whole big idea, to my mind, is have greater Russia back the way it was. No more of these breakaway nations. So he takes Ukraine, then Transnistria, then he gets Moldova, and then he starts putting the pressure on Poland and Romania and all the former Warsaw Pact countries, as we used to call them, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. He's not stopping with Ukraine. This is important for people to realize.
Well, that's
we don't help
exactly
put a
the
stop to them
argument.
there.
Hal, that's exactly the argument, which we'd need another 3 hours to go into, on why NATO nations, you know, might need to rethink, but I don't want to get into that. It's a great debate, though.
Yes.
And it does matter. And to your point, it is Canadian soldiers who did do a lot of the training right up until it was February 25th when the first dropped in.
And they just moved back into Poland. They've not gone away, and we've not stopped the training. Can I add one other little personal event?
Please.
I go to the November 11th Remembrance Day ceremonies in Centerville, New Brunswick. Population, I think 600, but it's where my parents' farm is. It's where a lot of New Brunswickers came and joined up and served in the military. They have a war memorial up there that has both those who died in the war and those who served afterwards. We have 11 of our family names on that cenotaph, so I'd better turn up. But I'll tell you, every time I've gone up for such a small community, the crowd that turns out gets bigger and better, and they bring their children, and they're respectful, and they want to ask questions, and they come over to say thank you. I feel that the message is getting out to a lot of people, and I am very proud to go up there each year to see all of these people who, I remember my father's time when he played the last post, okay, 40, 50, 60 people. For a small community, there's usually several hundred now attending the Remembrance Day ceremonies. People know, they haven't forgotten us. That's what I see.
That's beautiful.
Small towns.
I might bet that it's going to be warmer in Centerville than it is in Stony Point for Remembrance Day. But
Onaway is going to be probably a little on the chilly side again. But you know, it's like he said, and that's a huge point. It's the small communities. Like I'm going to be in Onaway, and we're going to be at the Heritage Center, and that place is going to be packed.
Yep.
And these are kids and families that are coming from farm communities and the more rural communities, not going to the big city of Edmonton. They're going to the small ones. And that's where it's more personable.
And I don't want anyone to lose perspective on this. You know, the Canadian Armed Forces has approximately 2,000 to 3,000 members deployed in more than 20 different missions around the world right now. Training missions, intelligence missions, support missions. So that's Canadian Army, Royal Canadian Air Force, Canadian Navy, and of course now all under a new Commander-in-Chief, King Charles III. But I want to say to our panelists, first of all, this 1 hour has flown by a blink of an eye, and Shirley, Bob, and Hal, we thank you for your insight, your openness, and always, always we thank you for your service. All the people who have joined this conversation today for Remembrance Day week, Historica Canada for what is such a powerful initiative of remembering, and most of all, again, we thank all of our troops. We salute the memory of those who died in service to this country. Peace in the world still is elusive. We know that every single day with the conflicts unfolding in different countries, but it matters that we listen to those who served, to those who fought and survived, and of course never forget those who fought and did not come home. So on behalf of Historica Canada, I want to thank you all for joining us. Shirley, Hal, and Bob, this was just an amazing hour. So
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you very much.
Work without
Lisa?
the moderation. Thank you.
Can I add a little thank you? I want to thank all the mental health facilitators that are out there that have taken the late night phone calls, because if it wasn't for those that helped me, I wouldn't be here.
wow.
They'd listen, and hopefully one day they'll be able to, they'll give more avenues for people in the secured world to be able to speak openly to.
We remember them too. The Memory Project. Thanks to everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank
Shirley and
you.
Bob.